Thanks so much for joining us for this week's live Q&A. If you've got questions, put it in the comments. We'll get to reading those out. And if you've got answers to other people's questions, please chime in. It's wonderful to see the community all around the world answering each other's questions and helping each other in the amazing pursuit of beekeeping. Today we're going to harvest a little bit of honey as we're answering questions. So I'll set up that now and just pop your questions in below, and Trace, who you might recognise her voice if you've ever phoned into the Flow HQ, she'll be reading those questions out. So all we need to do is pick a frame to harvest, and look at this. This is a beautiful example of a whole lot of capped honey frames. We're just out the other side of our spring now. The flow has actually slowed right down, but we've got a whole lot of capped frames here, and you can actually see the capping down beneath the, if you look between the frames, you can see quite a few cells in, and give us a thumbs up if you can see the capping. It's like the wax they put on the top of the cell. It's like a lid on a preserving jar to say that honey has a low enough moisture content and it'll keep for seemingly ever if the moisture content can stay low enough. And that's when it's ready for us to harvest some too. So you want to be harvesting honey that's capped if possible. As a conventional beekeeper that I did for many years, harvesting the old way, we would make sure our frames were at least 70% capped before we harvest. Now, all we need to do with our flow frame invention is put a jar here, put a tube in there, and I'm going to harvest with a nice tall jar, simply so I can continue asking questions without swapping the little jars. So I've got the little tube here, and we are in the rain, and harvesting honey in the rain is something you can do with the flow hive quite easily, but you wouldn't do it with conventional harvesting because you're pulling the hive apart, and bees do not like having their hive pulled apart in the rain. But here with our flow hive invention, you can harvest honey in the rain. You will need a cover for your jar so that rain doesn't get in and increase that moisture content. Okay, so let's just grab our flow key here, and all we need to do is give it a turn like that, and what you're going to see is channels forming inside the comb, the honey flowing down and out. If it's hard to turn, do it in segments, and it's not too bad today. So that's the full frame, and what you'll be seeing here is a single cell line with honey draining down, and this pattern will repeat throughout the frame. So each cell, if you like, is splitting vertically, allowing a zigzagging pathway for honey to flow down into this trough at the bottom and out into the jar. Now it's a bit colder today, and we're harvesting an edge frame, so you will find that the honey will flow a bit more slowly. There it is, just dripping there. If we chose a central frame, it would probably flow a lot quicker because the brood nest is here, keeping the hive at about our body temperature. That's the temperature they need to make sure the brood will survive. Any questions coming in as we watch this honey harvest?
Yes, Ada. Got a question coming in, and actually I spoke to someone on the phone about this yesterday. They were in Sydney, and the flow hive looked nice and full, the frame looked full, but they were having problems getting out the honey, and they were pretty sure it was crystallized, and they wanted me to ask any tips or tricks on getting crystallized honey out of a flow frame.
Okay, now that's something that happens very rarely actually. There was a lot of concern about that really early on when we launched in 2015, but we rarely have any feedback with crystallizing honey causing issues. But there are two things that can stop honey flowing. One is crystallization, which, as you say, could stop the honey flowing where you've got a whole lot of candied honey, if you like. Now, that one, even if it's partially candied, so maybe chime back in and let me know whether if the honey came out it was cloudy. if it's cloudy when it comes out, that's the start of the crystallization process. And normally the bees are keeping it nice and warm so you don't get much candying going on inside the hive. The other one is thixotropic honey, which is a property that you find in the manuka honey or the local, what's called the jelly bush. And that sets like jelly, so it might be that one. And if you get 100% of it, then it will set in the frame. It's hard to actually get the honey to come out of the frame because it sets like jelly. Now, if it's about 50% jelly, 50% liquid honey, then you'll probably find that it will flow readily anyway and you'll see globules coming out. Let us know whether you're seeing cloudy honey coming out or whether it is more like jelly globules.
Great, thanks Cedar. Jim's asking, how come this doesn't squash the bees when you're harvesting?
Okay, we put a lot of effort into making this as gentle as a process as possible for the bees, and we've even got a whole patent about it. So if you imagine building honeycomb cells like this that move like that and back again. Now the move like that is okay and it creates the channels, but the move back, if you had the parts meeting, then what you end up with is the possibility of a bee putting its leg through or its wings through, and when the parts come back it could get jammed in between the moving parts. So to avoid that happening, we put gaps, a V-shaped gap here that the bees then have to bridge with their wax. So if there happens to be bees down the cells, now ideally you're harvesting when the frame is nice and full and it's got all capping across it, but let's say there's an area that is empty or dry and there's bees working down the cells when you turn the key, then what you find is the parts move like that and then move back, and then this V-shaped bridge of wax will break and leave a gap for the bees' knees so they can get out. At worst, your bee will be stuck in wax because you've got that bridge of wax there, and the other bees will help it out by chewing away that wax, which is the process they do when they're rebuilding or repairing the comb for the next nectar flow.
Great. Cedar, tips. Nick's asking, how do people keep bees alive in places with really harsh winters?
Yum, that's the privet honey. So we had the privet honey flowing here earlier in the spring, and this frame hasn't been harvested yet, so we have that really light privet honey. It's like a lollipop. So your question was about cold.
Oh, yeah, keeping bees alive, Cedar, in cold, really places with harsh winters.
So Apis mellifera is the European honeybee originating from Europe, where there is very long cold winters. So it's very much acclimatized for those long cold winters. Now what you'll find is that bees are extremely good at storing honey so they can survive through the winter. So one of the main things in those colder regions, whether you're keeping bees in flow hives or in any type of hive, is to make sure they have enough stores to last the long cold winter, because that, after all, is their food to survive. So beekeepers who are harvesting honey will make sure they have enough stores in the box to survive the winter, and if there isn't, they'll generally feed a sugar syrup, a thick syrup, 2-to-1 ratio sugar to water. They'll cook that up, let it cool. They'll feed the hive prior to the winter, so if they don't have any honey stores, they can at least store some sugar syrup in place of honey and have something to consume to keep them alive through that winter, because the bees need to have that fuel, if you like. They need to disconnect their wing muscles and vibrate to create warmth and keep themselves warm enough to survive the winter. Generally, the queen will stop laying when it gets extremely cold, so they don't have to then keep it at a body temperature to keep that uncapped brood warm, they will actually just keep themselves warm enough to survive, and then as the season progresses and starts warming up again, the queen starts laying again, and so on. But the main thing to do is make sure they have enough stores to survive the winter. Get some local knowledge on that, about how much honey you need for your bees to survive a long, cold winter.
Great. Cedar Clinton's wondering, I'm not sure if he was talking about this hive that you're harvesting, but he noticed there's a bit of a build-up of honey in the trough and other frames. He could be referring to his own. Should that be left like that, or should you clean it out before harvesting?
Great, yes. I noticed that here this morning, so well picked up. You can see some in here, and I decided to leave it because it's a great little show and tell. You see, this one has no honey in the trough area. This one has the tiniest bit. This one has a lot. So it's a good idea to not leave that there too long, because it could ferment if you're in a more humid climate, or go crystallized if you're in a colder climate. Trick, and make sure any honey that ends up in that trough area, perhaps after harvesting, or if the bees don't do a perfect job of sealing up all of the parts, then it will come through and drip back into the hive for the bees to reuse. And if you look closely, you'll even see their little tongues trying to lick that honey around the corner. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that. You might need a macro lens for that. Sophie, could you grab my phone? I'll show the macro bee tongue view.
Ooh.
Because it's quite cool to see them licking. And I'll see if I can show that and how this leak back point works. But ideally, you clean that out if the bees have blocked it, because bees will be bees, and even though it's better that they don't, they will sometimes block up that area. So let's just pull in here and watch their little heads and see if there's a tongue coming around the corner. Can you see those tongues? Give us a thumbs up if you can see that tongue licking there. There we go. Look at that. So the tongue is covered in what's called branched hairs. It's a bit of like a mop, and the bees will actually mop up the honey, bring it back into their mouth, and they'll take it back to what's called a honey stomach, and then they will go and place it in a better place in the hive, in one of the cells. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that tongue licking away. Might even pull in a little closer for you. That's pretty cool. Bees' tongues. In my experiments, they can lick about 7 millimeters. So, as you say, cleaning out that is a good idea. Now, if it's blocked, let me show you a little trick here. You can use this key, or you can use anything, or each time you harvest with the tube, when you poke the tube in, it'll automatically clean out that for you. We tried to do as much as we could, so there's less for you to think about and do with the flow frames. And so one of the things we've done is make sure when you insert your tube for harvesting, it unblocks that area for you each time. But if the bees have blocked it up in the meantime, sometimes turning the cap around will break that seal, and that's all you need to do. And other times just poking something down in between those parts will allow a channel for any build-up in that trough area to flow back into the hive. And the cap, we'll put these little ridges on, which allows a little gap for the honey to flow down, but not big enough for any ants to get through.
That's great. See, that looked amazing, that tongue, and a few people are commenting on it. It looked like something out of Alien or something.
Yeah.
So good.
Macro bee world. Look at that beautiful honey flowing on this cold, rainy day.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of other good comments. Cedar, you were talking about harvesting in the rain. We've got someone who also likes to harvest at night with the flow hive.
Oh, nighttime flow hive harvesting. That's nice. Now, a little tip, if you are doing any kind of beekeeping at night, is use a red light. Bees don't see red light, so if you've got a head torch, they often have a red light on them, and that's much nicer, because if you have a white light, bees will get attracted to that, and you don't really want them attracted to your face. So a red light on a head torch is a hot tip for any nighttime springtime beekeeping, like when you're moving a hive or something like that.
Great. And Violet just wanted to comment, just so happy to catch this live stream as their hive has just arrived and the bees are doing fine, so getting pretty excited to put her super on. So thanks, Violet, for that. Now Kim, this is a good one. Kim has a standard traditional hive and uses 3 boxes, but is really interested in trying a flow hive, but never seen on any of our clips or anything that we have more than 1 brood box. Just wondering, could you add more boxes?
Absolutely. If you look down beyond this hive, you'll see there's 3 hives down in the bottom row where we've added more boxes. So you certainly can do that, and that is typical beekeeping. And especially in the colder regions, people will like to add another brood box or another super. Now, for me, I like to keep it in this configuration if possible, and that's simply because it's easier to manage. If you need to find the queen, there's only 1 box to look through. And we don't have the long cold winters, so we don't need those extra areas for the bees to store honey for a long cold winter. So I like to keep it simple in this configuration, but if you want to go ahead and add another brood box or another super, in extreme cases I've seen them add 7 flow supers high up in Canada, where you've got a very short compressed season where everything flowers at once, and they like to have a lot of room in the hives. Now, keeping in this configuration in this subtropical region works quite well for us here, but as said, in the colder regions, another brood box is very common. So you can go ahead and add that. And you could also add another box for honeycomb collection if you like. After all, it's a beehive, so you can go ahead and add more boxes if you want to. Now, having said that, the flow hive does allow you to harvest honey in a different way. Conventionally, what I would do is stack boxes as the season progressed and harvest when a whole lot of hives had a whole lot of honey stored on them in one big batch, because it's such an ordeal to harvest with the centrifuge, the decapping bench, the big mess that it creates, that you may as well batch process. The flow hive allows you to just harvest a jar of honey, and when you see some more full, harvest another jar. When you see some more full, harvest some more. So you'll be storing honey in jars on the shelf instead of in boxes on the hive. And why that's a major advantage is you don't need lots of supers anymore to store on the hive in the season. You can store honey in jars instead of boxes in your apiary. And that's a major advantage because you don't then need to take up half your shed with sticky honey boxes when it's time to take the supers off or lessen the size of the hive. To me, that was a big mess. The wax moth get in, the vermin get in, it's just this, and the ants come, of course, so it's just this big mess inside your home or your shed. Whereas the flow hive allows you to keep it much more contained, where this is the hive, this is the harvesting equipment, and this is all you need to harvest beautiful produce instead of all of the ordeal it once took in the conventional harvesting. So while you can go ahead and add as many boxes as you like, the flow hive does allow you to keep it in a more simple fashion with less boxes. Having said that, springtime is when the bees might swarm if they don't have enough room. So that's when you'll be needing to harvest some honey, make some space, or take a split. So my preferred method is run the hive smaller with just 2 boxes and take the splits in the springtime to limit the chances of your hive swarming. Long answers, which is often the case with beekeeping. Keep the questions coming in.
Great, thanks Eda. Now Charlene's question is, they've just caught a swarm and they've settled in, look healthy and just about ready for the flow hive. Just wondering, are there any health checks that they should be doing before installing it in the flow hive, like looking for any pests, diseases, mites, anything like that, before they actually put the swarm into the flow box? Okay,
great question. So as a beekeeper, you're always on the lookout for any issues. So those issues might be AFB, which is the kind of like the worst one you can get, which is where you see a patchy brood patterns, sunken dark cappings with piercings in it. Have a look up that one, look at the resources, and look. As a beekeeper, you need to know what that looks like, and you might smell what smells like a dead kangaroo, and that is what's called AFB, or American foul brood. So always be on the lookout for that, and as you transfer your frames into your brood box, just have a good look at them. Make sure everything looks nice, happy and healthy. You don't have that sort of sunken dark cappings with piercings in them. And get familiar with anything else that might be pathogens for bees, which one is chalk brood, which that one you can nurse your hive back to health with. Another one is sac brood, another one is EFB, which is European foul brood. So if you have those sort of in the back of your mind as you beekeep, and it does take a while to learn, then if you spot something amiss, then you can take appropriate actions to remedy that. Now, having said that, if you've just ordered a nucleus from a bee breeder, then it's unlikely to have any problems, but as said, just keep a lookout as you transfer your frames into your brood box. And it's always nice to have someone who's been beekeeping for a while, who knows what a normal healthy colony looks like. So if you can grab a friend, that's great. If you can't, have a look at our resources and have a look on our website, have a look at our Facebook page, YouTube channel to educate yourself. And we also have an online course at thebeekeeper.org which gets rave reviews. It's also a great fundraiser, and it's made to take you from square one, knowing nothing about bees, all the way through to even a deep scientific knowledge. And we're happy to say we've planted over 1.5 million trees in high quality ecosystems to create a lot more habitat for bees, and supported a lot of great projects around the world as well. So have a look at thebeekeeper.org if you do want an online course to step you through with experts from all over the world that contribute to that. But great question, and it's great thinking to even be asking those questions as you're moving your nucleus into your flow hive. But generally, get in your bee suit, grab your smoker, find a nice, warm, sunny day, transfer your bees from your nucleus into your flow hive brood box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. And when there's lots of bees in the box and they're using all the frames in the bottom, you can then go ahead and add your flow super.
Great. Nikki's wondering, Cedar, does cracking the whole frame at once make it more likely that the flow frame may leak?
In my experience, no, but others would disagree, and they always like to harvest, say, half of the frame, then half of the frame, 5 or 10 minutes later. So as you like, you can see how this is quite full actually. So there is potential. I can see it's kind of full up to here. There is potential, but if it was going to be spilling, it would be this bottom corner. So I should see it if it's spilling out here, right? So if you see that it's spilling out of this bottom, this is the lowest cell in the frame. So if you see it spilling out there, then yes, perhaps you've got very fast moving honey and it's overwhelmed the flow rate of this tube and the trough, in which case harvesting segments could reduce any spills out of this area here, but I'm not seeing that. So it looks pretty good to me. I go ahead and harvest in one go. Sometimes you get spills due to the way the bees have capped the frame, or perhaps there's areas that are uncapped down low and really bulgous up top, and the fluid dynamics are such that some honey will push out. I don't tend to find it a problem because the bees are used to mopping up honey in a hive, harvesting conventionally. I used to spill a lot of honey in hives. You'd open a roof, you'd break a whole lot of comb, you'd have honey drenching the bees, it'd be coming out the entrance and so on. The bees would get to work and clean that all up. Now we've got some rain coming, so what we might do is put a cover over the top like this to stop any rain getting in the jar, and it's also useful to stop any bees if we are going to walk away coming for the honey, which if your bees are hungry, they do like to come around and jump in the honey jar. So squeezing it around so we get a good seal. I'm just missing a little bit there, so I might just move it across a bit, pinching under the tube like that and around the jar. You can use any kind of wrap that you might use for school lunches. This is the reusable wax and cloth wrap, but you could use any kind of kitchen wrap. Okay, it's not too rainy. We'll continue out here, but we might have to dash for cover at some point. Harvesting honey in the rain is certainly something you can do with a flow hive, and certainly something you would try to avoid in conventional beekeeping.
So there are flow hives for all types of bees?
They're for all types of the Apis mellifera species of honeybee. We do have the Cape honeybee in South Africa that can also use a flow hive, which is a variant. We do have people in Japan with Apis japonica, which is another, it's actually a smaller bee, and people there have successfully got them to work with flow frames. But generally Apis mellifera is what you are using, and that's the honeybee that humans have taken all around the world wherever they have gone, because they're such extreme little pollinators and also produce an amazing amount of honey. So they're now completely intertwined with humans in their agriculture. So that's generally what people call bees. But of course, there is a lot of native bee species. There's almost 20,000 in the world of native bee species. Some are tiny, titchy little like fly-looking species, and others are big bumblebees, or we've got teddy bear bees here, or we've got blue banded bees with blue stripes. But most of them are solitary and don't use a hive like this, and they don't form a colony. And what they'll do is just lay a few eggs inside a hole in the mud, or inside a bamboo tube, or in a pollinator house. Like we like to do a project recycling offcuts, creating pollinator houses and raising funds for great projects. So those native bees don't use a hive like this. And our native Tetragonula carbonaria bee, which is called the sugar bag bee here in Australia, doesn't use a hive like this either. It's a little black fly-like bee that has a completely different comb structure, but does actually produce a little bit of honey. So for all types of Apis mellifera and some subspecies, yes, but the native other bee species, no, you wouldn't put them in a flow hive. That's the short answer.
So it's a few people wondering where we are in
We
the
are
world.
on the east coast of Australia, near a place called Byron Bay. Looks like we're in Wales or something today with this grey, rainy day and green grass. We have had a lot of rain. It's all looking very green, and it's a subtropical region here, so we can harvest honey all year round. In fact, we get some good flows right through the winter, especially when the rains come and set off the paperbark, which the indigenous here call the rain tree. It responds to the rain, has great blooms through winter, and we can get quite a lot of honey. Other regions in colder climates where you get a long cold winter, you tend to get a climate that has almost half the year without any flowers, and that is why the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, stores honey that's for that long cold winter. But us here in this subtropical region, there isn't really a winter as far as the bees are concerned, and they'll keep storing honey and we can keep harvesting it all year round.
Great, and Fred Dunn's joined us again. We haven't seen him for a while, so hey Fred.
G'day Fred. If anyone hasn't checked out Fred's channel, have a look. He's a wealth of knowledge and he's great at answering questions, especially specific to those colder regions, because he's up in the north of North America, and it's quite different keeping bees in those regions to here. However, there are many things that are the same as well. So he's got some great episodes on the beekeeper.org as well. You can have a look there, where he's teaching you how to overwinter bees in those colder climates. And a big thank you, Fred, for chiming in and helping answer so many questions.
Yeah, and here's a question from someone in northeast Victoria. They've got lots of plants, flowering, everything's looking good, but they did their first hive split at the start of spring. The new hive has a queen. They did an inspection on both hives last week to discover, though, there was no stored honey, no brood cells or eggs, just empty comb. Any thoughts on that? So they're in northeast Victoria here in Australia.
Okay, it sounds like you might have a hive that's lost its queen. So if you've got no eggs, no brood, then you're going to need to remedy that situation, or that hive will slowly dwindle away to nothing. And if you've got hive beetles in your area, that's when they might take advantage and take over. So activating the pest management tray down the bottom is a must. Put some oil in there, catch some of those beetles, give your weak colony a helping hand. You need to get in there and give the bees another chance to raise a queen. You can do that by taking a frame from your other hive and putting it back in. If that frame has eggs on it, they will hopefully raise a queen from one of those eggs. By feeding that single cell or that young larvae, if it's only just emerged from its egg, they can turn it into a queen by feeding it royal jelly for its entire larval stage. Now, if you have the ability to buy in a queen, which you should have this time of year in Victoria, then try and get one as soon as possible, because that will give you a jump start and get your hive back to being queen right quicker. You can then introduce a queen to that hive. The little candy block at the end of the queen cage, they'll chew away, the queen will be released, and hopefully they will accept that queen and your hive will get back on its feet. Now, if your hive's been queenless for a long time, it may be the case that they won't accept a new queen, in which case you might need to then merge the colony with your other one. Now, to do that, if you've decided not to give them another go at inserting a queen, or they won't take a new queen, you'll grab the brood box here with hopefully still some resources in it and a whole bunch of bees. You'll put a sheet of newspaper on top of your other hive that does have a queen, and then what you'll do is move that brood box onto the top with a sheet of newspaper in between, poke some holes in it. The bees will then chew away at that newspaper. Now, you're poking holes for ventilation, but it also gives the bees a start to start chewing away. They will, over a few days, they'll shred that newspaper. The colonies will then slowly merge, and that will limit fighting between the two colonies as you merge those two together. And that's the way you can save the resources and save the remaining bees if they won't take a new queen. So a couple of options there for you. Now, as far as the flow frames, if that hive has got flow frames on it that have honey stores, the best thing to do if you can is put them temporarily in a freezer while you wait for the colony to be strong enough to then put them back on the hive again.
Right. Cedar, a few people have noticed, of course, our weather guard today, and with this rain, wondering how it's working on the flow hive at the moment.
Let's just have a little look-see at that, see what's going on. Well, I can see a lot of rain on top of the weather guard, and I can't see any on the landing board, so it looks like it's keeping that dry, which is nice. It's a new product here that we have released, and it's just a simple weather guard. If you've got snow, it could be really helpful for keeping it from landing and blocking the entrance. If you've got a lot of rain in your area, it'll help keep it dry and give the bees somewhere to be when it's raining that isn't all wet if you have a lot of bees in your hive. So we have put a piece of plywood under here so that the bees can then hang off that more easily, and it also provides some insulation if this is getting really hot in the sun. And we have a sealing strip along here so that when the water flows down the hive, it's less likely to go down and onto the landing board. So the tip there is to make sure that is pressed firmly up against the hive, make sure it's pressed down so that water can't use the handle as a conduit to bypass your sealing strip. two positions it can go in generally on the flow hives. One is down low like that, and the other one is up high above the handle. You can use 1 or 2 screws depending on how hard you want it to be affixed, and it just can pop on and off like this. So depending on what you're doing. Now this is pretty firm on this side, but I just need to slide it up. Now do wear your bee suit if you're on the entrance side. And it does work with the entrance reducer as well, as you can see we have on this hive. More for a show and tell than anything here. We generally don't need to use them in this climate here. But other parts of the world where they get long cold winters, entrance reducers are a great way to stop mice getting in, just to limit wasps decimating a lot of hives, bees in the hive and so on. So entrance reducer can be on when you put your weather guard. That little notch there is made for your L screw that holds your entrance reducer on, and you've got a few options, but basically you're sliding it over the keyhole and then up. So the way it goes on is like that and like this. If you want to see an unboxing, dial back a few weeks, and what you'll see is start to finish. Now the bees have gotten a little annoyed with me at the entrance, which is pretty normal. The bees getting defensive of their entrance area. So I'm just going to step away and let them be.
Cedar, just on the flow, back to the flow frames again, does each one of those flow frames have a different flavoured honey?
Generally, yes, depends. Let's say you've had your hive near what we call a monofloral source, where there's only one flowering of a whole lot of things, then you will get a lot of the same honey throughout the frames. But generally here, and in many parts of the world, you get a whole lot of different things flowering, producing different honeys throughout the season. So while this one looks like it's mainly the privet honey, which flowered a few months ago, I can see there's some darker frames in here showing me there's some of the winter flowers, which can get almost black honey in this area. And then spring typically is the lighter shades. So there's as many different flavours of honey and colours as there is flowers producing nectar in the world. So you'll get this amazing variety, and I really do recommend isolating the flavours. If you harvest everything to one bucket, it's like mixing all the flavours in your kitchen together. You still get something that's nice, but not necessarily as nice as having separate flavours. So people really do rave about the ability to isolate honey flavours and really share that experience, and clever beekeepers will even market that and say it's a single frame origin, and a lot of people say you get more flavour from harvesting with a flow hive than conventional honey harvesting. And the reason why I think that is one, you've got single frame flavours, but the other one is you've got less processing, so the honey hasn't touched the metal centrifuge, it hasn't touched the hot knife, it hasn't touched all the sieves and buckets and all of that, it hasn't been spun through the air and oxidised in your centrifuge and so on. Just literally gravity has allowed it to flow out of the hive and into your jar, so you retain more flavour that way. And there's actually been a Queensland University study to prove that, and it's one thing that has become an amazing, I guess, advantage of harvesting with our flow frames.
Right, so David's in Perth here in Western Australia. Just wondering, what's the best time of the year to start a hive?
Oh yum, that is lolly shop honey. The best time of year to start a hive, now that will depend on where you are in the world, but generally springtime is a wonderful time to get started because you've got a lot of flowers flowering, a lot of resources for the bees, a lot of nectar and pollen for them to go and get, and that really speeds up the process of getting your hive going, because more resources coming in means the queen will lay more eggs, means there'll be more baby bees, which means there'll be more foragers to go out and collect that nectar and store hopefully a lot of honey for you to share some too. Other times of year can be really good depending on where you are. Now here in the subtropical region you can almost start a hive any time of year. As said earlier, we do get some good nectar flows right through the winter. In other colder regions you generally wouldn't be starting with a small colony at the end of the season in your autumn or your fall, because your bees might not have enough honey stores or a big enough colony to survive through to the next spring. It also depends on how you get started. One of the ways you might like to start, if you're at a time of year where there's not a lot of resources available, is you might like to purchase a complete conventional Langstroth hive and do what we call a swap out, swapping the bees and the comb into your flow hive. And that way you've got a big colony, you've already got some stores, and you can start that way at other times of year. And in many places summer's a good time as well, especially inland here in Australia. Beekeepers will actually be moving their hives from this coastal region inland at about this time to get big nectar flows. So that's the commercial beekeepers who are migrating their hives. So inland, the summer can be a very good time to start as well. Local knowledge is key. Ask around, ask whether you can start bees at this time in your local region.
Right. So Marcus is wondering, he lives in northern Queensland, and just wondering about strapping down your hives if the cyclone comes, and he's just wondering, do we ever strap down the hives that he can see in the background here, and if so, how do you do it?
Look, very rarely. We did find that the classic hives would blow the roof off when the wind would get to, say, 80 kilometres an hour, which does happen here up this slope, and that's one of the reasons why on the Flow Hive 2 we put these roof locks. We rarely use them because we added a bit more overlap and the roof seemed to stay on anyway, but in those stronger times you might like to screw these roof locks in, hold your roof on, or put a strap around your hive and to the ground. So cyclones are another level again, where you've got winds exceeding 100 kilometres an hour. So strapping your hive down is a good idea if you have one of them going. So you strap right over the hive and to something on the ground either side to make sure it's not going to tip over. If you find your hive has tipped over, either from extreme wind or perhaps livestock have knocked it over or something like that, try and get it put back up the right way within 24 hours, and that'll limit the chances of the bees absconding. If it's on its side for too long, your bees will often pack up shop and leave for a better home. Good luck if you are in a cyclone area.
Yeah. Marissa's wondering, did a brood box inspection and there was still lots of room left on the frames, but just noticing in the afternoon there's a lot of the bees that stay outside the hive. She's just wondering, is that normal or should they do a split?
Okay, it is normal as there's a lot of resources available and as the weather is warmer to see a lot of bees at the entrance. Now, if you have both a lot of bees at the entrance forming a bit of beard and you open the side windows and you can hardly see the comb. It's a bit quiet today, it's pretty cold, the bees are bunkering more towards the centre of the hive, you're not seeing a whole lot here. So this hive is in no danger of swarming. But if you look in the side windows you cannot see the comb, then yes, it is a good idea to take a split or add another box to relieve that primary trigger of swarming, which is not enough space for the queen to lay eggs. Other things you can do is make some room in the brood box. If you don't want to take a split, you could take some of the edge frames, which are typically honey, away. Or if you're using naturally drawn comb, then you can just simply cut out some of the comb from the edge, put that frame straight back towards the centre, and the bees will have new real estate to make some comb. The queen will have fresh area to lay eggs and it will limit that primary swarming trigger. Or going ahead and adding another box or another super is another thing you can do. But if you see a lot of bees at the entrance, you open the side window and there's not many there, it's simply hot and they are vacating to create enough space in the hive for ventilation to properly flow through between the combs. So the side window is a great tool to be able to tell how crowded the hive is.
See, Lynette's in central Queensland and has just asking about the setup actually. So a hive has a brood box, the queen excluder, the flow super, and then a manly box, which is for bee resources. I'm not sure if it's a manly or something, manly box. Is there a preferred order to stack the boxes? Should the manly be on the queen excluder or the flow super be on the queen excluder, or does it matter which order you put it in?
So that all depends on why you're adding that shallow box. So in the colder regions where Fred Dunn's from, he actually likes to use a shallow box to be a honey barrier and then doesn't use a queen excluder. So he'll go deep like that, then a shallow box, which is called an ideal, and then the flow super on top of that, and doesn't bother with the queen excluder. And it's unlikely that the bees will build brood all the way up into the super. So that's the reason why he is adding that extra box in between, which is not full depth. Whereas other people are adding it for honeycomb storage. So if you're adding it for honeycomb storage, then it's going to be better if it's on top, because you can easily then access your honeycomb to take some out for that next gathering you've got, rather than having to pull off a heavy super to access the honeycomb below. So if you're storing honey like Trace likes to do, she likes to add another box on top to store some honeycomb, and she loves to bring her beautiful honeycomb in for the team to share here. So you can go ahead and add it then on top of your flow super to collect some honeycomb.
Thanks, Cedar, I sure do. And then we've got someone asking, Cedar, they want me to ask you, can you stop the rain for wherever they are so that they can tend to their bees? So have you got some power to the people upstairs?
Yes. I'll fly up really high in my paraglider, pull a few strings and see what I can do for you.
Fantastic. Neil wants to know, Cedar, what's the best way to clean the super? Neil's is a bit stuck and a bit hard to operate at the moment. Cleaning the flow frames, I guess.
Okay, so if you've used your flow frames for multiple seasons, we find after about 5 years or going on 10 years now, people are deciding to clean the flow frames. Please don't throw them away. Give them another lease of life by harvesting the honey if you can. Take the flow frames out. Now, if you're having trouble harvesting the honey because it's all very waxy and very stuck, 2 keys in the top is a tip like that. Leave them there for a while so you're butterflying them. Give extra bit of pressure there, and hopefully those parts will lift and you'll get the honey out. If you find that you're still having trouble harvesting the honey, then you could take the frame out, run a butter knife down between the cell lines just to loosen them, and you'll then be able to get the moving parts to move, and the honey can then come out. Once you've harvested the honey, you can take your frames out of the hive, and we've found the best way to clean them is with a pressure washer. So put them on either flat down on a surface like a driveway or concrete surface, or lean them up against the wall. You do want them supported, otherwise the pressure might blow the frame apart and it's tedious to put all the segments back together. So you'll be setting them in open position, using your pressure washer down the cells to just blast a whole lot of the old wax off, and then you can start again by letting them dry and putting them back in the hive. Now pay special attention to the window side, get that as clean as you can so you can get this beautiful view back again, and get a whole lot of wax and propolis off so you can see through and watch what the bees are doing once more. And that way you'll get a new lease of life of your flow frames. We want them to last as long as possible, and it's wonderful to see people doing that now that we're 9.5 years in, and people are washing them up, putting them back into the hive to start again.
Great. And Cedar, Fred's just tuned back and saying, look, thanks, well explained before when you were talking about what Fred does. And he said that he leaves the medium box then for overwinter while they remove the flow super. So it works really well, and they're in the northern USA. He's in the northern USA.
Great. Yes, very cold regions do like to leave some honey stores for the long cold winter ahead. And adding an ideal box could be an ideal way to store some more honey for a long cold winter. And if you want to find out a bit more about that, then have a look at thebeekeeper.org and you'll see Fred's video on that, or have a look at his own YouTube channel and you'll see some great overwintering tips for those colder regions.
Right. Mel's wondering, Cedar, have you found that the flow frames alter the taste of the honey?
To me, they preserve the taste of the honey, and you'll get beekeepers that have been harvesting conventionally for a very long time, like our friend John Gates up in Canada, and his response was, when he first tasted honey coming from his flow hive, he's like, wow, it's just like biting into honeycomb. And the reason why we find that is the only thing that's gotten it out of the hive is gravity. The honey hasn't touched any other equipment, it hasn't been spun through the air in a centrifuge, hasn't been mixed with a whole lot of different honeys, hasn't had that exposure to the decapping knife and sieving buckets and all of those things. It's just literally as close as it can be to biting into fresh honeycomb. And I don't think there's any flavour being altered by the parts, because the parts that the bees then build their wax onto are made from polypropylene, and that's one of the most stable plastics you can find, and it also then gets covered by the bees in wax. So if you like, down the cells, the honey storage is in its own little wax pocket, and you can see that build up over time in the cells.
Great. Cedar, Ash is just wondering, is the flow predominantly meant for use in Australia, or does it work in other climates?
We haven't really found a place in the world where it doesn't work, except for where there's no bees, like Antarctica. People are using flow hives in Nebraska, and we can show you some great videos, we'll put some links in below, of people harvesting in those extreme colder regions. It works in the hot desert regions, it works in the temperate climates like the subtropical region here where we are, and the tropical. So it works wherever you find the European honeybee. And there are subspecies of Apis mellifera, like the Cape honeybee, that people have found that and successfully harvested from, with the Cape honeybee using the flow frames as well. So it's, yes, invented in Australia, but very popular around the world, and that was happened really out of the gate with our extreme start with our crowdfunding, where we had 130 different countries ordering our flow frames at once, and it's continued on as a global, with a lot of global interest and people harvesting honey all over the world from all corners of the globe. Chime in, let us know where you have your flow hive, and let us know what your honey tastes like.
Great. Cedar, Mike's asking, do you replace your queen, or do you let them do their own?
So generally here sometimes we do replace some queens, generally if there is some aggression. Around here where we've got a lot of our team, we like to have guests come sometimes. We don't want too much aggression, so for that reason, when we have an aggressive hive, we'll generally mark it down as one we will replace the queen. Otherwise, we let the bees to raise their own. We'll gamble on that. The newly mated queen may mate with drones from down the road that have aggressive traits and bring that genetics back into the hive, but we find mostly they don't. And when we let them raise their own queens, that they have a general calm demeanour around here. But if you do want to more guarantee both gentle genetics and a nice productive hive, and hopefully hygienic as well, keeping pathogens away, then order a queen from a breeder who is breeding for those specific traits. And it'll come mated already with a known genetics for you.
Great. Where's Reed? Perth, Western Australia, recently did a split on the hive, and just wondering how long does it take to get back to a good honey flow again, as the numbers seem pretty low?
Okay, that all depends. Like, you can get into situations where you've taken a split and you've taken the queen from the main hive into the split, and then it might be quite a while before, there might be a month down while they get back on their feet. In that time, make sure you're catching some of the hive beetles if you have those in your area by activating the pest management tray below. But if you've left the queen in the parent colony and you've taken the split and you've taken what's called a even split, where you've taken half the frames out, then it will, as you say, reduce the numbers quite a lot, and there'll typically be a month where there's less bees in the hive and less production. As said, make sure you're looking after your hive, activating your pest management tray, catching some of those hive beetles if you have those. But all going well, it should bounce back reasonably quickly, where the queen starts laying a lot of eggs and there's a lot of new bees and a lot of new foragers.
So once you purchase a flow hive, where do you get the queen, and is that all you need to get started with a beehive?
So if you just purchase a queen, that is not enough. You need at least what's called a package, which is an artificial swarm where they've shaken a whole lot of bees out of a hive, and then they'll give you a mated queen. You can order that in the mail, and you might have 5,000 or 10,000 bees rocking up in a package. Interesting expression from your postal service as they drop that at your door with this buzzing box of insects. And then you can go ahead, transfer those bees into your brood box, put all of your frames in, put in your mated queen, and the hive can start from that. Now, it's more common around here for people to purchase what's called a nucleus, which is a going little hive with about half the number of frames that you have in your brood box here. Just wooden wax frames typically, and what you'll find is they'll come in a little what's called a nucleus box. You'll position it where you want your hive to be, and on the next warm sunny day where you have time, you can then get out your bee suit and your smoker, transfer those frames, which are complete with a laying queen, honey stores, pollen stores, everything a beehive has. You'll transfer them into the bottom box, put the rest of your frames in, look after them, and they'll grow from there. Nucleus is the easiest way to get going, but there are other methods like catching a swarm, like making a bait hive and attracting bees into your hive. So just a queen won't do. You'll need more resources than that, which is at least a whole pile of bees to go with your queen.
Pedro's tuning in from Chile and just loves the invention, but wondering how many times can you collect the honey?
So it depends where you are, but in your region it's probably similar to here, unless you're up in the mountains, where you'll be able to harvest it almost all year round. So you're in the subtropical region, you'll get a lot of different honey flows as the season progresses. So here where we are, as a rule of thumb, we could harvest all of these frames twice in a season, sometimes a lot more or sometimes less if your colony is weak, or perhaps there's a drought or fire that's really impacting the local flowers. So here we have 7 of these frames, so that would be 14 of these jars full from a single hive. And if you're on the ball when there's a good nectar flow, you might be able to harvest a lot more than that by continually harvesting when you see the frames are nice and full like this. Today the honey's moving slow because it is an edge frame and it's been cool overnight, and there's actually less bees in this hive, keeping the hive warm. But we've got a beautiful jar of honey here, and if we wait a bit longer it should fill too close to the top.
Fred's doing a great job answering heaps of questions on YouTube, but we've got, I don't know if you remember Cedar last week, Happy Hounds in Ireland was thinking about getting a hive, so they've finally got their hive, and so pretty excited, and Fred's answering questions for Happy Hounds. But one of his questions is actually about hive beetles, and are they everywhere? Because they hear us talking about them, but they've never heard of them in Ireland.
I don't think they are, so chime in if you know for sure whether there's the small hive beetle, little black beetle that can be annoying when colonies get weak. Chime in if they're in Ireland, but I don't think so. And we do have one of our team members' mother has a flow hive in Ireland, and she's using the native Irish black bee. So you could go ahead and get your native bee, which is fun, in Ireland to be storing beautiful amounts of honey for you.
Right, a couple of people are asking, Cedar, I think it's the flow key they're talking about that looks like a little pole there, like we've got some little antenna going on.
But
the
flow key, yes.
The key.
I often just stab them in the ground like that because it's a useful spot to come and get it. So you don't need to be collecting signals with your flow key. You can store it in your caddy like this. We've put a little pocket at the back there for your flow key and made this beautiful little box for you to store everything you need, including your logbook and your hive tool, your brush, etc. We've got a little tray here that you can easily wash for any sticky tubes afterwards, and this can actually come off and be a tool belt if you want to put it on a belt around your waist, and then a little area for your smoker. I did find that I'm always running around looking for bits and pieces, so having a little box with everything contained is a nice way to go.
David's wondering, is it a good idea to empty every second frame as opposed to all the frames at once?
I think so. It's less disturbance for your bees for a start, and it also makes things more efficient because there will be leftover honey in here on the walls of all the cells. Well, there's a bee interested in the honey. Now, if you find bees are coming after the honey, then cover the jar up like this, and it also keeps the rain out on a rainy day harvest like we have today. So this is just a bit of wax wrap that you use for your kids' lunch boxes, for sandwich wrap, or you could use any type of cling wrap. Back to the question.
Oh God, now I've forgotten what my question was. Oh, I've had a brain rock. I'm dropping from one to the other. Oh, no, now I know. No. Is it good to empty every second frame or do the whole box at once? Sorry about that.
So, every second frame is a great idea because that way they can transfer any remaining honey from this to any empty cells in that one, so it's a bit more efficient like that. And it's less disturbance for your bees. Honey is also a thermal mass, so it creates insulation and a thermal mass above the brood nest here. So taking every second frame is half as much of that thermal mass disappearing at once. So it's just a more gentle thing to do for your bees. However, conventionally, most beekeepers just take all the honey away at once. So while you can do that, harvesting every second, I think, is a great way to go and quite easy to do with the flow hive and annoying to do in conventional harvesting.
Great. Now this, I think, maybe is talking about the brood box. The bees have drawn too far out of the frame, butting into the next frame. What should I do? They're in Victoria, Australia. Could be talking about the flow frames.
Hey, out of there.
So drawn too far out of the comb, so they're butting into each frame. Just wondering what they should do.
So if it's in the brood nest, now they will always leave space for bees to work the comb. If you've manipulated the frames in such a way that there's comb pressing against comb, that is a danger if you've got hive beetles in your area, because the bees can't service the comb pressing against comb. And that's where a hive beetle could lay thousands of eggs, and you get a lot of maggots, and it starts turning into a hive beetle slime out instead of a beehive brood nest. So for that reason, if you're manipulating the combs in the bottom box, do make sure there is room. Bees will always leave room, but if you're changing the frames, make sure to put them back in an order where there is room. And if there isn't, because for whatever reason you're purposefully manipulating the order, then cut off any protrusions. Even though it makes a mess and spills honey into the hive, cut it off. The bees will be able to get in there and repair that quite quickly. Whereas if it's like this, it'll take them a while to chew in from the edges. In the top box, yes, they will build the comb out further. Sometimes we will overflow these jars. Now, but as said, they will always leave space for them to work. So unless you change the order, then there'll always be space for the bees to work between the frames.
Nathan wants to know, can you just have one of these in your backyard?
Absolutely. So beekeeping is very popular in urban backyards, on rooftops, on balconies in the city, and so on. It's an amazing thing we can do, and I think humans really do yearn to have a way to do some farming, to make real produce. And a beehive's one thing you can do if you've got no land. You can produce beautiful honey to share with your friends and family, and all from a very small footprint like this, and particularly with the flow hive, because this is everything you need to harvest beautiful honey. You don't need the room you once needed in your shed or garage for conventional harvesting. You can now just harvest honey with our invention directly to your jar and have a very small contained area of your balcony to do some honey production. My sister kept hives in Berlin for a while on a balcony several stories up, and I think she was keeping 4 hives on her balcony. But of course you do have to be mindful of neighbours, and particularly the flight path of the bees. You don't want to point it where neighbours might be going through the flight path, so you want the bees to be able to get up and away without bothering anybody. That's probably the main consideration in urban environments. But urban beekeepers do boast they get longer honey season and more flavours because of all the things people plant around the cities. It's a very popular thing to be doing, and a wonderful way to produce honey or produce produce where you have no land at all.
David just said you mentioned the logbook earlier. Just wondering if you could show on the live the logbook that you're talking about.
Sure thing. So this is a little logbook that comes with our caddy, our useful beehive box, and the way we've set this up is you can fill in frames. You might like to show on a particular date what's happening in your flow frames just by colouring them in, and it's useful because you can sort of get a gauge where the bees are adding honey or taking it away, and that tells you what's going on in your honey season and potentially what's going on with the numbers of bees in your hive as well. And you've also got your brood inspection here, where you can put the demeanour of the bees, the brood pattern, the population, and whether you're seeing honey, nectar, eggs, larvae, drone brood, etc. So you can then keep a diary of your hive, and that can be a useful thing in beekeeping.
Great, thanks Cedar. And can people purchase these online?
Yes, you can jump in and have a look at our caddy with all of the bells and whistles, logbook and everything included.
Great. And Cedar, before you were talking about the harvesting every second frame, and it is the question I guess we get asked quite a lot is, and how often would you be able to harvest that second frame?
So it can get very exciting, particularly in the springtime, which is when in most regions where you've got everything flowering at once. And we've had our team here harvesting all of their frames, and 2 weeks later they're all full again. Harvest them again, 2 weeks later they're all full again. And when you get on what's called a honey flow like that, it can get very exciting where you can just keep harvesting as the bees bring it in. But equally you can get times of year where there's nothing for the bees to collect and no storage. and that's when they'll be consuming honey. And these windows will tell a story about what's going on. And if you see the honey retracting, cells that were full becoming empty, and your logbook will help you with that, or you can take photos and you can start seeing a checkerboarding pattern where there's full cells, empty cells and so on, showing you that the bees are actually reducing the honey. They're using that for their own resources. And other times when it's really filling, and when you see it filling and you've got some full frames that are capped like this, that is the time to then harvest some honey. And particularly in the springtime, you want to harvest some honey, make some space, which is important actually to limit your hive from swarming. You can see these cells are nice and full with a lot of capping down beneath and between the frames. And you can see here the bees are going about their business of chewing away the wax capping. So the honey's drained out from beneath their feet, and now they're starting the process of tearing it down. They recycle that wax to complete the cells again, start depositing nectar, and the whole process starts again. You can see their abdomens pulsating as they're licking away and sucking honey with their bees' tongues, which is like a mop if you like, and bring it back into their mouth parts and into their honey stomachs. I'll see if I can get a macro of that. We saw some earlier. Dial back to the start if you want to see a bee's tongue licking in the trough area. Now let's see how this goes. So that's pretty cool. You can see a bee cleaning its tongue there. And what else have we got to show you? That one's busy. One's busy. Have we got any that are licking away? Let's have a look there. There, you can see, give us a shout out if you can see that bee mopping up honey. Maybe the one over here. This is the one. Look at that tongue go. Give us a shout out if you can see that tongue licking down into that cell there. That is pretty cool. It's great to have these windows. You know, commercial beekeepers go, why would you bother putting windows on the side? We just lift the hives here if it's heavy and that's the time to harvest. And then we give them a hive with windows and they go, wow, that's really quite useful.
That looks great. Cedar, you were talking before about the flight path, and the question is, how close to a fence can you put the entrance to the hive? Because you talked about the bees flying in and up. Does it need to be is 1 foot too far enough, or what's the shortest amount you can put your hive up against a fence?
Look, if you have to, you can put the hive, you know, with a fence right here. But what you'll find if you do that is the bees will come out of the hive and double back, and their flight path will be somewhere back this way. Now we used to keep a lot of hives like that, and it just means you've got bees flying past you as you're harvesting honey. So if you can allow a couple of meters out the front so the bees can get up and away, about this much room out the front of the hive, and you'll find they'll then go up and out and on their way foraging. We've got time for a few more questions. Great questions coming in today. We've got a rainy day harvest and I'm getting slowly wetter.
So Serena's in Perth, Cedar, always seems to have a problem with the honey getting trapped in the trough and does not flow back into the hive, as the bees keep sealing the flow, that leak back channel, with propolis. Turning the cap occasionally helps, but I'm going away for a month. Is it okay to leave the fermented honey in the channel while they go away?
If the honey's been there a long time, you can see here we've got some honey there. In this one, if you find it's gone fermented, then simply put a tube in there, drain that honey away. Don't let it go back to the bees, because fermented honey can give the bees dysentery. So if it tastes good, then let it go back to the bees. If it tastes sour, then drain it away. So that's all you need to do. Generally, it can stay in there for a month and it is fine, and often won't ferment. So you should be just fine.
Right. So now, of course, what's the size of this jar that you're harvesting into today?
This is a 2 litre jar. So we find 2 litre jars are the right size for harvesting a single frame of honey. And we often have the shorter, wider jars, but these tall ones are wonderful because you can really see the colour of the honey through them better. And it's a wonderful thing to have a whole lot of jars where you can see the colours really easily.
Nice. So Cedar, once you close off the flow frames, will you take any more honey out of this hive?
I won't take any more today. I can actually see the bees are starting to consume honey. The spring flow goes well early on, then it finishes quite abruptly, and I can see while there's still a tiny bit coming into some hives, mostly they're stopped bringing in a lot of nectar. So for that reason I will just harvest this frame and leave the rest for the bees for the moment until I start seeing the nectar flow coming back in. Now if this hive was crowded, I might choose to continue to harvest, but you can see that actually bee numbers are quite low in this hive, so I'm not worried about swarming. I will leave the rest of the remaining honey in until I see the honey picking back up and that pattern you see in the windows increasing in honey.
Right, and how long, Cedar, has it taken for this hive to get that much honey in it?
So this is a bit of a checkerboard where you've got a dark frame here which has actually come in our winter time, and then the lighter colours either side which has come in the springtime. So basically since winter through to spring, all of this honey has been stored. So that's in the last 4 or 5 months. Now, we were talking earlier about the different times in the season. If you get a really good honey flow in spring, you can find that they'll fill up all of these frames in 2 weeks. And in extreme cases, in Canada, where you've got a huge flow that happens all compressed into a small part of the year, they boast that they can fill a whole super in a single day. I've never seen that, and it's pretty exciting to even have the frames fill up in a week, which you do see that in this area. That seems fast to me. Other times of the year, as said, it can be very slow, or you might not even get honey in an entire season. Like any farming, it is dependent on both the health of your livestock and the flowers being able to be foraged on, producing a lot of nectar and pollen for the bees to then bring back into the hive.
Great.
Thank you very much for all of your great questions. I'm going to get out of the rain now. Harvesting honey in the rain is something you certainly can do when you are harvesting with a flow hive, but something you would certainly avoid doing conventionally. So one of the many advantages of harvesting honey with a flow hive. Now don't forget to reset the frame by putting the key in the top slot and turning that back to a 90. And a tip is leave it in that position for a minute or two while you pack up. That way all of the frame parts will move back into the correct location. If you do a little quick close, you might find the cells aren't quite aligned, and that will cause you problems downstream with a whole lot of wax build-up that might disturb the honey flow. Thanks for all your great questions. Let us know what you'd like us to cover next time. And also a big shout out, a big thank you to all of those tuning in and helping answer other people's questions. It's so good to see a global community helping people get started in the wonderful pursuit of beekeeping. Same time next week. See you then.